And joining us right now, former U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Joe DiGenova. Joe, in a few moments, I will ask you about your first Barry Manilow concert, because that is legendary.
Right.
We've all
can't wait.
all heard about.
Lola was a showgirl, you know.
I've heard that.
I knew you would throw down with Copacabana.
Yes.
But first, let's talk about all of this news about states quarantining Ebola patients.
Right.
We talked about this. You know, New York now, they've sort of crumbled under the Obama administration's wishes here, and they've now sort of said that you're quarantined if you're a healthcare worker coming from West Africa, but you're confined to your own home. You're sort of on the honor system here. First of all, what legal rights do states have in this situation?
Well, pretty much widespread. Every state in the union, plus the federal government, have laws requiring quarantines and authorizing quarantines under certain circumstances. I mean, we've had quarantines in the United States from colonial times. 1663, smallpox. 1730, New York built the first hospital on Bedloe's Island for quarantining people. Philadelphia, 1799. So it goes on and on through the 1918 flu epidemic. Vast power, but it is reviewable in courts, and there's a couple of interesting cases from recent years where quarantines have been challenged. One of them was in 2007. A fellow caught TB in Italy on his honeymoon, came back. He was quarantined, a guy named Andrew Speaker, and he challenged his quarantine and actually got his terms of confinement reduced. So it's going to be interesting to watch the nurse Hickox in New Jersey, who certainly has a lousy bedside manner, but other than that, she certainly has a legal right to challenge her confinement. I think I don't know if she's going to win or not.
Does she have good standing, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. If
she
you're
has
confined,
standing.
you can sue. I mean,
Yeah.
she's been told.
Does she have a good case?
Well, we won't know until we know what her diagnosis is. I mean, I think the government has a right to quarantine people forcibly upon return from a hemorrhagic land, which West Africa is. She may win on the basis of specific facts in her case, but the courts are going to be in a very difficult position if they were to release someone like her and an Ebola breakout happen as a result of her. Really, really difficult things for courts. But she has the right to challenge, and it'll be very interesting to see what happens.
You know, part of the problem here, Joe, is that if you come back into this country, a lot of people say, oh, well, we'll be on our honor. We'll take our temperature twice a day.
That's
and
the
if
Snyderman rule.
And that's the example that everybody turns to. Nancy Snyderman, a doctor and an NBC correspondent, she comes back, she agrees to go into voluntary quarantine, and then she's seen out at the Chinese restaurant the next day with her crew. And so the promise didn't mean much in her case.
Well, I think there's great risk in what Andrew Cuomo has just done. He has obviously caved to union pressure as well as pressure from the White House to basically unmandate his mandatory quarantine. If New York has a breakout, Cuomo is going to be in very serious political trouble. But I think at this point, given what we know about Ebola and about the number of infections that have come from people who have actually worked in West Africa, these quarantines are perfectly justified. And while I understand what Dr. Fauci and other people are trying to do by calming fears, actually the guy, Tom Frieden, has created more fear by disinformation than anything else. The American people are not afraid of Ebola. What they're afraid of is idiotic comments coming from public officials who are supposed to know better and obviously don't. I think the governors of New York and New Jersey had it right. I think people coming back from West Africa should be quarantined for a minimum of 21 days. You know, nobody says you have to go to Africa, but if you go there, you're assuming certain risks, and you're not assuming them for me.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, though, Joe. You mentioned that the courts, and obviously the courts have a right to review these things, and constitutionally
Right.
they could intercede. What about the federal government over the states? You just said the states from the beginning
Right.
have had these quarantines. Can the administration and the federal government come in and have a nationwide policy that supersedes the states on this?
Absolutely. The federal law, there's actually a lot of court cases on this. Quarantine by the federal government supersedes all state laws. Once the federal government, as we say, occupies this field, which it has done in the national health law, there is a standing executive order which presidents can amend and add various diseases to. There is a provision of the current executive order on quarantines, which includes viral hemorrhagic fevers, which, of course, is Ebola. So if the federal government, which they have not done yet, imposes a mandatory quarantine, New York and New Jersey would be bound.
Well, but what about lifting a quarantine? In other words, if the state says we need a quarantine, can the Fed say, no, you don't? Lift it.
No, they cannot.
Okay.
Because classically, states have had the authority to regulate health within their borders. The federal government cannot tell a state to lift a ban legally. If a state wants to have one, it can have one because the Supreme Court has recognized generally the authority of states over health and safety matters within their own borders. They've also recognized the power of the federal government for preventive reasons because they control the borders to provide quarantine when people enter the country.
All right, but in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we seem to be taking a hands-off approach. I mean, Governor McAuliffe was asked about this, and his folks said, we don't really have a policy about this right
Considering
now.
it. Yeah.
We're just thinking about it.
Well, this is not a profile in courage, and this should not be surprising. I mean, Terry McAuliffe is nothing more than a political hack who accidentally got elected governor. He's a wise investor who returned to America to vote in the elections. He's just a kind of a strange guy, and he's a hot dog and always been a hot dog, and now he's playing fast and loose with a very, very major.
Well, this governing is hard, Joe. You know how hard it is to actually govern.
Yeah, I know. Well, Terry's never been a guy to want to deal with hard things. I mean, he's basically a party guy.
Joe DiGenova, before we lose you here, we've only got a minute left, but there has been some developments in the Benghazi case. Most specifically, Ahmed Abu Khattala was in court again last week, right after we spoke to you, in fact, and he's now been charged with additional murders. This makes him eligible for the death penalty. Are you watching this case? I'm guessing you are. And how do you think Judge Cooper's doing?
Very, very. That's why these cases should be in real military tribunals where real cases are heard in Guantanamo. He should be in Guantanamo Bay. This case is going to be exceptionally difficult to prosecute. The law and order model which the administration is using is the wrong one. This is a military issue. He is an enemy combatant. He should be in Guantanamo. He should be in a military tribunal, or he should be held until the end of hostilities, which may be 40 or 50 years from now.
All right. Thanks, Joe DiGenova. Always good to have you. And by the way, next week when we have Joe on Monday, it'll be the day before the midterm elections, and he's always got